Good day. Before I proceed with this video, there are a number of points I do want to make and make them fairly briefly. The first is, following on from what I've been saying in all my recent videos, this is that if you are watching us on Rumble, if you find us on Rumble's homepage, if you decide to watch a Duran video or an Alexander Mercouris video or an Alex Christoforou video on Rumble, then you can go to the top of the video, see a red maroon button, and if you press it, that will take you directly to our locals page, where we have a thriving community and where we publish now an increasing amount of exclusive content. And of course you can join that community and you can participate in it. By the way, if you are trying to find me on Rumble, you can type my name into the search bar, Alexander Mercouris, and that will take you directly to my channel on Rumble. Now, the second thing I have to say is that obviously we are now, or so it seems, in Ukraine or eastern Ukraine into what might be called a pre-war situation. Now, when these kind of conflicts arise, obviously the information battle becomes extremely important as each side wants to persuade the other of its views. Now, on past experience, I have to add this warning that, of course, when we find ourselves in those kind of information wars, when there's this very sort of heady atmosphere which starts to brew up, then of course restrictions can start to appear. So if those restrictions do appear, if they start affecting this channel or any of our other channels, well, the place to go is either Rumble or perhaps better still locals. You can go directly to our locals page and you can find all our videos there. And by the way, we also have Duran TV as well. May I say that I'm not anticipating anything. This isn't a warning that such a thing is going to happen. I very much hope it doesn't. But in case it does, please be alert and be prepared. I would just finally say that if you, of course, go and watch my programs on Rumble or on Locals, even if the worst happens, you will find my commentary, or at least that I try to make my commentary as measured, as balanced, as inclusive, and to the best extent that I can, as objective as always. I will, of course, set out my opinions, but I will make it clear when they are my opinions, and when I engage in speculation, I will endeavor to make that clear also. That's always been my practice. It will continue to be my practice, irrespective of what happens. But of course, the possibility does exist that there are some people who are not particularly interested in opinions or speculations, or indeed even objective analysis of facts which conflict with the opinions that they have. So that's all I'm going to say about these matters. I just wanted to get that out of the way. I'm going to unfortunately be repeating this statement in future videos. I'm sure you can all understand why. Now, having said all of this, I'm now going to discuss the situation in Ukraine. But before I do, I'm going to again reiterate a point I've made in many programs, which is that as I'm not in any conceivable shape or way a military person, I have no experience of fighting or battles. I've never served in the military. I don't even have that great interest in military things that many civilians have. I'm not the best person to discuss and analyze military events or to give predictions about the course that they're going to take. There are plenty of other people I would recommend, above all Scott Ritter, who can do that much better than me. Obviously, I will have to touch on the course of military events, but don't expect me, as I said, to be the principal analyst of them. I don't have that area of expertise. Military matters are some things that until fairly recently I took little interest in. So, having said those things, let me just now discuss what's going on. Well, the first thing to say is that clearly there's been a major flare-up of shelling in the Donbass, which began on Thursday. It built up substantially on Friday, and it is continuing today, Saturday. Before I go on to discuss the politics of this, I would make one observation about it. Well, I would make two observations about it, which is that so far as I can see, we are not talking about false flags at the moment. I say that because a false flag, properly understood or construed, is a situation where somebody carries out some kind of military attack pretending to be someone else. I've seen no evidence of that so far. So far as I can see, there is shelling going on. Both sides are engaging in it. Neither side is pretending to be the other when they engage in this shelling, or I have seen no evidence to support any such conclusion. Alongside the shelling, there's been what appear to be some sabotage attempts. There appears to have been some sort of attempt to assassinate the chief militia leader in the Donetsk People's Republic. Again, this is a car bomb attempt, allegedly. We don't have any information about this at the moment, apart from the fact that the Russian investigative committee is apparently opening an investigation into that matter. I'm not going to prejudge that outcome of the investigation, that particular investigation, until more information comes to light. But with respect to the shelling, it seems to me that there is no evidence so far of anybody launching shells or bombs or mortar shells or such things and pretending to be the other side. So this whole false flag narrative that we've been hearing so much about over the last few weeks, so far up to this point, remains, or so it seems to me, a red herring. That is not to deny that there might be arguments about who initiated this exchange of fire, which has been, as I said, persisting over the last 3 days. Each side blames the other. Each side claims that there is an attempt to provoke them into doing things which might lead to much greater consequences. And each side so far is insisting that they're not going to let themselves be provoked in that sort of way. But provocation is one thing, false flag is different. Words should be given their correct meaning. And as I said already, I don't see this as any kind of false flag situation, at least for the moment. Now, let's talk about what's going on. The first thing to say is that so far as I can tell, it is only shelling, and it is shelling rather than hand-to-hand fighting. And also, remarkably, the number of casualties on each side is extremely light. The Donbass republics, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, have so far, as of the time of the making of this video, admitted to no casualties at all, either military or civilian, by which I mean they're not admitting that any one of their people has been killed. I should say that I find that a bit surprising and remarkable given the intensity of the shelling that is going on, but I record that fact. It seems to be the case at the moment. The Ukrainians claim that one of their soldiers was killed, which again seems a remarkably light number, remarkably small number of casualties given the intensity of the firing that is taking place. And that, by the way, may point to the fact, and I just say this speculatively, that perhaps though each side is shooting in the other's general direction, they are careful at the moment not to escalate this to the point of inflicting casualties, in which case this may still leave open the possibility for some sort of pullback. Anyway, that's one point. Now, having said that, when shelling on this scale takes place, the possibility of an escalation becomes extremely real. And here I have to say that over the course of yesterday, Friday, something happened which I do find extremely ominous, which is that for the first time there was confirmed information, or at least claimed information, that proper artillery, tubed artillery, started to be used in the shelling. And this comes basically from the militia. They claimed that there's been artillery shells fired by Ukrainian military 122 millimeter guns. Now, of course, I want to stress, I can't corroborate this. I have no means of corroborating this information. But if this is true, then this is a very serious escalation indeed. Up to now, all the shelling that has been taking place consists of mortar shells, and light arms. It has not up to very recently graduated to outright artillery exchanges, though perhaps we're starting to look at this. And that's not to deny that some of these mortar bombs that are being launched aren't extremely dangerous and deadly weapons. And again, if you believe the militia, and I can't either corroborate this story, but I've no reason to disbelieve it either, the Ukrainians have been launching 120 millimeter mortar bombs, which, as I understand it, can be very devastating weapons indeed. They're quite heavy mortar bombs, and they have the potential to cause very real damage. Now, the militia have been, of course, organizing an evacuation into Russia, and they've been organizing a general mobilization of their forces. And I would say that it's quite clear that both of these steps, both the evacuation, which so far as I can see is confined to women, children and old people, that this is not a complete evacuation of the Donbass, including many women, it seems. Many women will be staying there too. But clearly this has been prepared long in advance for these kind of contingencies. Now, there's been some reports in the Western media which deny that this evacuation is taking place at all. There's ample television evidence from Russia which confirms it. There's ample social media evidence from Russia which appears to confirm it. I have no doubt that it is indeed taking place. And of course, the mobilization of reservists that's also taking place on the territory of the two republics, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, that also clearly is part of a long prepared contingency to deal with this sort of situation. And obviously these are plans that have been around for a long time to deal with the kind of situation that we're seeing today. And those contingency plans, both the evacuation and the mobilization, they've been activated. And the leaders of the Donetsk People's Republic also claim that they've obtained copies of Ukraine's battle plans, that they apparently know, or so they claim, the major axes of the Ukrainian military's advance if an offensive is indeed launched. And they say that the Ukrainian objective is to reach the Ukrainian border within 48 hours. So they claim they have this information, but they also claim that they expect Zelensky to give an order for this general offensive, which implies that they don't have any information yet that he has actually given it. And here I have to say we have some signs of confusion on the Ukrainian side, because so far Ukrainian leaders, Danilov, who is the head of the National Security and Defense Council, Kuleba, who is the foreign minister, and the Ukrainian general in overall charge of the Ukrainian military on the contact line, are all heatedly denying that any offensive is being planned on the part of the Ukrainians. And moreover, we've now had statements from Zelensky himself. He is coming out and saying clearly that he doesn't want to start a war. And now I'm taking this from Sputnik, which is of course a Russian news agency. I have no reason to doubt that this report is accurate. It says that Kiev is not reacting to provocations and plans to restore peace in Ukraine using diplomacy, Ukrainian President Zelensky said on Saturday. Our security and defense forces have the situation fully under control. We are not reacting to provocations and are striving to restore peace through diplomacy. And that's what President Zelensky is saying. And by the way, since we're on the topic of Zelensky, he seems to have infuriated the United States by leaving Ukraine and going to Munich to attend the Munich Security Conference. There have been various statements from Zelensky, appearing in the US media, saying that the Americans are deeply angered by this decision, that they strongly advised Zelensky not to leave Ukraine and go to Munich, but he insisted on doing so. And it seems one of the people that he's also going to be speaking to over the next couple of hours, perhaps whilst he is in Munich, is President Macron of France. And President Macron of France is apparently trying to talk to Putin. There's a meeting arranged, moments for a telephone conversation with Putin arranged between Macron and Putin tomorrow. So this is, as I said, annoyed the Americans. And of course it comes shortly after President Biden made comments to the American media, saying again that he is convinced that a Russian invasion of Ukraine is going to happen over the next few days. He used the word convinced. And he also said that he expects the Russian army to march on Kiev when that invasion begins. So Zelensky's coming to Munich is obviously inconsistent with that message, and one can understand perhaps why the Americans are somewhat angry about it. And I think that the Americans are becoming increasingly exasperated with Zelensky altogether. He continuously refuses to stay on message, at least as far as they're concerned. So that's Zelensky. That's, as I said, some confusion about what Zelensky thinks. And I should also say that the Ukrainians have apparently proposed a convening of the Trilateral Contact Group. This is the group which actually brings together the Ukraine and the representatives of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, though Russia participates in it. The head of the of the Trilateral Contact Group tried to set up a meeting on Friday. There was some talk that there would be a meeting today, Saturday. At one point it looked as if that meeting on Saturday had been called off, with the leaders of the Donbass apparently unwilling to go. Latest reports made as I make this program suggest that that meeting is back on. Of course, we will see whether or not that meeting does take place. But of course, the point of that meeting, the point of the contact group, was to try to arrange the ceasefire terms try to control the fighting in the Donbass. It's the place where the militia and the Ukrainian military exchange information and talk to each other. And I would have thought that it's more likely than not that such a meeting will take place before very long, because if it is indeed the case, if there is indeed a willingness on one side or both sides to avoid fighting, to avoid this situation escalating into all-round war. And I should say again that it's not just Zelensky who's talking peace. I don't know how much weight one can place on that. It's not just Macron who's busy beating the phones. Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, has also been speaking at the Munich Security Conference. And actually he said some really rather interesting things, because he went further than he has ever done up to now, so far as I can see, to rule out the idea of Ukraine joining NATO. And though again he was careful perhaps in his use of words, he didn't outright repudiate the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO one day, he did speak in a way that I at least found interesting. He said that this is absolutely not on the agenda. It's not going to happen in the foreseeable future. For that reason, he also said that it is not going to be as a casus, it cannot be a casus belli. And we've also seen reports. Now, I've only read these reports in the Russian media, but I'm no again reason to doubt that this is true. There's apparently also been reports circulating in Germany that the Ukrainian ambassador has been pressing the Germans for an entry date for Ukraine into NATO, and that the Germans are so angry with him because he continues to persist in doing this that they're now avoiding speaking to him. Now, that was Scholz, who, as I said, seems to be trying to dampen the situation, trying to sort of stop a war by essentially ruling out Ukraine's membership of NATO in any foreseeable future. But of course, he's not the only person who speaks for Germany, and the inexperienced, and I have to say very young, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock in the Munich Security Conference made the mistake of doing the very thing that Olaf Scholz has been studiously careful to avoid doing. She publicly confirmed that the cancellation of Nord Stream 2 was on the agenda if the situation escalated to the point where sanctions had to be imposed. Now, as I've explained previously, this is something that Olaf Scholz, the German government, has been loath to do up to now, because they don't want to create a pretext for sanctions like that to be imposed. They don't want to create a pretext for which would lead to pressure being placed upon them to cancel Nord Stream 2. But Baerbock, less experienced, more naive, younger, more Atlanticist in her general orientation, perhaps always looked like the weak link in the chain, and at the Munich Security Conference she buckled. I'm sure there will be a lot of people in Germany who are quietly angry with her about this, but it seems to me that the damage has now been done. It will be very difficult, all but impossible, I suspect, for this to be rowed back in any way. Now, I say that there's been an interesting report from Reuters that says that there's been now some general agreement about what the sanctions should be, and we roughly know what they are going to be. There will be sanctions on the big Russian banks to prevent them converting dollars into rubles. there will be restrictions on high-tech exports to Russia, and of course there will be the cancellation of Nord Stream 2, which Baerbock has just very foolishly confirmed. There is no agreement apparently amongst the Western powers as to what would be the event that would trigger the launch of the sanctions. Apparently the US and Britain want sanctions to be launched on even the slightest pretext, but some European countries have been pushing back on this and are very unhappy about giving ground on having some much less significant pretext being the reason to trigger the sanctions. And apparently there's still no full agreement on this within NATO or the EU. And it seems to me that Baerbock has to some extent now undermined that position, but of course it hasn't presumably disintegrated entirely. We will see what happens. Anyway, French and the Germans are doing what they're doing. May amount to much. More likely, I have to say, or so it seems to me at the moment, it will amount to nothing. It's more than likely, it's looking, I'm sorry to say, highly likely that this situation is going to escalate into outright fighting over the next couple of days. I hope that doesn't happen, but the possibility is there. So what will happen if that does indeed take place? Well, we've had a statement from the head of the Duma, the Speaker of the Duma, Vyacheslav Volodin, and he spoke, and his comments have been reported by the TASS news agency. He said, Russia doesn't want war. Our President Vladimir Putin repeatedly said this earlier and is saying this these days. However, if danger arises to the lives of Russians and compatriots living in the Donetsk People's Republics and the Lugansk People's Republics, our country will defend them. So that's what the Speaker of the Duma has said. And then we've had a news conference in Moscow following a meeting between Putin and President Lukashenko of Belarus. And it's interesting to see that on the situation in Ukraine, it was Lukashenko who was a great deal more forthright. But this is what Lukashenko had to say, and he said so in Putin's presence and with Putin implicitly agreeing with him. Lukashenko said this: Mr. Putin, we did not invade Ukraine, and the poor things that are so upset, they're looking for a new pretext to push Ukraine into some sort of provocations. As to my, and then he goes on to say that he went on to say that he went into a more detailed discussion about the situation in Belarus, and he spoke as follows. What was the general? He spoke about the fact that the people who are pushing the war in Ukraine are stupid. He was extraordinarily forthright about this, and he said the West is actively trying, if not to destabilize, then to at least aggravate the situation. However, they have no illusions that the events of August 2020 will be repeated. He's talking about the situation in Belarus, of course, but then he spoke about Ukraine as well, and he said that if there is an escalation, then it is the situation, it is the West that is to blame for this, and that the people who have been creating the situation on the border are being straightforwardly stupid. But perhaps the more interesting comments, as always, were said by Putin, and they're not about the situation in Belarus, they are, and in Ukraine as much, but they were about sanctions. And here I have to say that it did seem to me that there's been some misreporting of what Putin said. I don't think he was preparing the Russian people for tough sanctions that are about to be imposed because of actions that he is taking. Rather, he came across to me as fatalistic. In this, I think he shares a fatalism that many, many Russians share, in saying that he thinks that sanctions are going to happen almost irrespective of what happens in the future. And this is what Putin said. First, sanctions pressure is absolutely illegitimate. This is a gross violation of international law. Those who talk about this law care about it only when they stand to benefit. When there is nothing to gain, they conveniently forget all norms of international public law. We understand this perfectly. We have lived in this paradigm for many, many years because the powers that be believe they run the show and always interpret everything in their own favor, ignoring the interests of others. The only way out is to grow stronger from within, primarily in the economy. You are talking about sanctions. They will be imposed in any event, whether there is some excuse today, for instance, linked with the events in Ukraine, or there is no excuse. One will be found because the goal is different. The goal is to impede the development, in this case, of Russia and Belarus. Those who pursue this objective will always come up with an excuse to introduce various restrictions. I will repeat that these restrictions are illegitimate. They amount to unfair competition. In fact, this is the whole point. In the past 8 years, Russia has done much in this area, and this is called import substitution. We have not done everything we planned, but we have accomplished more than 90% of the tasks we set for ourselves. We will have to do more, and this is called enhancing economic sovereignty. Many countries of the world, even US allies, are facing today's restrictions, but they simply shut their mouth and bear it. As I said many, many years ago, nobody likes this. Nobody likes secondary sanctions or direct sanctions pressure. The boil will certainly burst eventually. It is important for us today to enhance our economic sovereignty and be more competent and up to date. We must give new impetuses to the modern areas of economic progress, digitalization, artificial intelligence, and genetics, to name a few. This is a complicated and big job. It is impossible to resolve this issue overnight, but we must move in this direction. And then he talked about the fact that he and Lukashenko are working together to make their economies sanctions-proof and to integrate their economies with each other. And Lukashenko had a great deal to say about this. So it seems to me that Fortress Russia, which has already been, as I said, the overall policy that the Russians have been following at least since 2014, Fortress Russia, or Russia First if you prefer, it remains fully the program going forward. Maybe something can be sorted out over the next few days with Scholz and Macron and with a trilateral contact group. I have to say it's looking increasingly unlikely as I've been speaking. Volodin, the Duma speaker, says that at some point, if the situation escalates, Russia will step in to protect its citizens. Of course, the West will say that's an invasion, and sanctions will at that point be imposed, regardless of what Scholz and Macron and others do. And the way for Russia in that event is to enhance their economic sovereignty, to build up their economy, to rely on their own resources, to rely on themselves. Ourselves alone, as the Irish nationalists at the beginning of the 20th century used to say. So there we are. Obviously, beyond this, though carefully not mentioned in these comments that Putin and Lukashenko made, there is the overarching shadow of China, Russia's great ally, or better than ally and friend. The Russians don't want to say anything that will cause the Chinese problems or embarrass them, which is why the Russians are not speaking for the Chinese in this matter. The Chinese have, however, spoken. There's been a very interesting editorial about this whole issue in Global Times. I'm going to discuss this in a subsequent video. So policy overall, ourselves alone, Russia, Belarus, working together to build up their economy. And the Speaker of the Duma saying that if things can't be sorted out, then sooner or later, the Russians will act to protect their own citizens. Anyway, I will finish with one final point, and that relates to some of the comments I made at the start of this video. And this is an editorial. This arises from an editorial that's appeared in the Financial Times, which, as I've said, has become the English language public voice of the United States government since the Biden administration took office in Europe. And I found some of what it said somewhat disturbing. I'm not going to read out the whole editorial, but I'm going to focus on two paragraphs which say the following. Western efforts to deter a Russian invasion through diplomatic engagement and warnings of severe economic sanctions may ultimately fail. Yet through their vigorous campaign to counter Russian disinformation, Western allies have managed to strip away any surprise, save over the precise timing and form of any attack and any possible subterfuge about its motives. If an assault occurs, few in the world's advanced democracies beyond the political fringes will be in any doubt that this is aggression based on an artificial crisis stirred up by Moscow. This is a big change from 2014, after protests toppled Ukraine's Russian-leaning president Viktor Yanukovych. The appearance of Russian troops in Crimea and then East Ukraine caught the world off guard. Some Western intellectuals and politicians were taken in by Russia's fake narrative of a Western-backed neo-Nazi coup. The words neo-Nazi coup are in quotation marks in Kiev, used to justify its military intervention to protect Russian speakers. Now, can I just say that I'm not going to unpack some of the points, the factual claims made here. I would say straight away that there are many factual claims with which I would personally take issue. But I am somewhat astonished by the extreme emphasis this editorial and presumably the Biden government give to news management issues. This obviously has been cited in White House briefings about the fact that the United States has supposedly been able to get Russia on some kind of media defensive. I do wonder that this is something that is given so much importance here. To give an example, I mean, there's references to some Western intellectuals and politicians being taken in by Russia's fake narrative in 2014. Well, which Western politicians and intellectuals precisely? I think some names might be useful. Obviously, we can guess a few, but I would point out that whoever those people are, they're certainly not part of the mainstream. And the mainstream narrative in the West has about the events in 2014 has, so far as I could see, already dominated the information space, so that this isn't really going to change anything much there. And I would also say that the idea that confining people of skeptical views to the political fringes, if that's the objective, then I have to say again that I have trouble reconciling that with my conception of democracy. The whole point of democracy, as I've understood it, is that everybody's opinions are respected and issues are argued out openly and fairly, with each person being allowed to have their say. But anyway, that's what I would say about that. There is one other comment, one other point in this editorial which did strike me, which is that it says that its focus on the fact that if an assault comes, few in the world's advanced democracies will be in any doubt that this is aggression based on an artificial crisis stirred up by Moscow. So this is not a campaign to win over world opinion in presumably Africa or Asia or India. Whether that's an advanced democracy, I rather doubt. Well, opinion in every place that is not an advanced democracy, presumably that means the United States and its core allies. Apparently that doesn't matter. It's opinion only in the advanced democracies that matter, and they are the people who have been the subject and target of this campaign. Well, again, I find that rather disturbing, but it does make me wonder what is to come. And it does make me concerned about what is to come. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about this editorial. Obviously, this is a fast-moving, difficult situation to keep on top of. I'll try to keep on top of it to the best extent that I can. There's always a risk that by the time this video gets broadcast, it will already be overtaken by events. But as of the time of its making, I believe that this is an accurate reflection of where we are, and of course the points made by Putin and Lukashenko and by Olaf Scholz, and indeed by Zelensky. Well, they're all matters of public record, and it seems to me that irrespective of what happens, my analysis of those stands. So we'll see what happens over the next few hours and the next few days, and you should expect more from me soon. Well, thank you for joining me again today. I look forward to you joining me again soon, both on this channel and on our main channel that you ran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou. You'll find links under this video, and of course you will also find links to Alex Christoforou's own channel. And I've already discussed that how we're on Rumble and Locals, and you'll find obviously links to us there under this video as well. And as I said, do please think now of following up on those links in light of all the things I've said on this program and some of the things that appeared in that Financial Times editorial, which, as I said, do fill me with some concern and foreboding. But anyway, that's obviously for you to decide to do. And in the meantime, you can also find us on plenty of other platforms: BitChute, Library, Odyssey, SuperU, links under this video also. And if you support our channel, you can support us via Patreon and Subscribestar, links under this video too. And of course you can go to our shop and buy the wonderful things that you can find there: bomber jackets and magic mugs and hats and hoodies and t-shirts and sweatshirts and all the rest.